Welcome to the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. Today we are joined by Dan Peck and Scott Clirehugh of the Dan Peck team. They are our residential lenders who have been working with our community for many, many years now. And what we're going to be focused on talking about are the top 5 insights about loans for investment properties. And you're going to walk away from this episode with a lot of insights about the details of loans available for you as you buy your investment properties and build your portfolio. So welcome, Dan and Scott, to the podcast.
Thank you guys for having us.
Always good to be with you.
So I wanted to start out and talk about the power of leverage, because a lot of people have been taught that taking loans are bad and getting debt, all types of debt, is bad. And so I was hoping one of you guys would talk about the power of leverage and the difference maybe between good debt and bad debt.
I mean, leverage has obviously been around for ages, and it's something that can have good things about it and bad things about it. I definitely think that when you look over time, the leverage of debt on a home has done nothing but build wealth across our nation for many, many people. I think a lot of people, if they understand leverage and how it works, they can use it to their advantage in a big way. This can go by leveraging home equity. It could go by leveraging investment accounts. There's all sorts of different ways you can leverage, but you typically will not find very many extremely wealthy people that have not used leverage. Almost in all cases, they've used leverage at some level, typically to go out and compound it could be buying other properties, doing other projects. A lot of opportunity in the market is provided or in front of an investor because they have the ability to leverage other stuff and to leverage it quickly. That could be getting handed a real estate property that needs to be closed in a week or two, and having the ability to go out and take another property that has leverage availability to it and quickly get cash to go buy that property. There's just a lot of different ways that leverage can be used in a positive light. Now there is bad leverage. Credit card debt is not necessarily good leverage. Car loans, you can throw that around too. Is that good leverage? I mean, because you're looking at a depreciating asset. Those kinds of things can be there, but most good leverage comes with a decent interest rate. And it's not very hard to go out there if you're doing it right and find a rate of return much higher than what that leverage is costing you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So Kenji and I think about good debt and bad debt. And when we think about good debt, it's leverage that you take to buy an asset that makes you money every single month. And that's kind of what you were talking about. The bad debt is maybe buying something that's depreciating or something that's costing you money. It's not actually adding to your growth of your net worth. And so what we're really talking about here is overcoming this fear that so many people have that all debt is bad. Scott, can you talk about how you've seen people be able to grow their portfolios with leverage versus not?
Absolutely. And in fact, to piggyback on something that Dan said earlier, when we think about leverage, oftentimes, especially as investor-friendly mortgage folks, we think about getting a mortgage on a home. And instead of paying cash for a home, we put 25% down and leverage the difference. But that's not really the only way that our clients are using leverage effectively. As Dan had mentioned, oftentimes we'll have a client that'll have a significant amount of equity in their primary residence, lazy equity, as some would call it. And what you can do is access a home equity line of credit, borrow your down payment against your primary residence, use that for your 15 to 25% down payment, and essentially get into an investment property with no money down. In addition, we have clients that will leverage retirement accounts if their employers will allow it, or brokerage accounts. All of those are effective opportunities to be able to utilize assets that are not just cash in your bank, and increase the amount of leverage and decrease the amount of actual cash out of pocket for a down payment on an investment property.
Yeah, and what you're noticing or what you're really reinforcing is buying things that cash flow, right? Because if you're paying a certain amount of interest on that leverage that you're using, if you're building a lot more cash flow on that money that you're using, and maybe you're even doing things like forcing appreciation or buying and getting immediate appreciation or having market appreciation, that's just compounding on top of it. But if you're producing cash flow at a higher percentage than the interest that you're paying on it, you're already working out and coming out on top.
That's exactly right. I mean, that is the power of arbitrage. Being able to borrow at one number and earn at a different number. And that's the secret sauce right there.
Awesome. So let's dive into the topic of today's discussion, which is talking about the top 5 insights about lending for investment properties. And I wanted to start out with the first one, which is working with an investor-friendly lender. And I was hoping you can kind of explain what an investor-friendly lender is, because I'm not sure that there's actually a formal definition out there. But can you kind of describe what it means to you? And certainly we'd love to share what it means to us. But it'd be great to kind of hear from you when you think about an investor-friendly lender versus, let's say, a regular lender who lends to people who are buying a primary home. What's the difference?
99% of the loan officers out there deal almost exclusively with primary residences. And frankly, Dan and I were no different up until a couple of years ago, where we would do the vast majority of our business was primary residences, and we'd have the occasional second home or investment property. For about the last 6 years, that has flipped completely the opposite. And now we are 99% investment transactions and second homes with the sprinkling of an occasional primary residence. And the real difference there is just experience. When you're working with investors, you're probably getting about 2 to 3 opportunities for every transaction that actually closes. And by that I mean, with investment properties, there's a little bit of a higher scrutiny in as far as the inspection goes. And so it's just part of the name of the game is that sometimes these transactions are not going to survive the inspection period. So you simply get a lot of at-bats when you're dealing with exclusively investors. And frankly, it just gives an investor-friendly lender a different perspective and a different amount of experience. When that's all the business that you do, you have the opportunity to spot red flags. We personally have a wide breadth of programs, but we also know that some will be appropriate for one property, but maybe not another. Is the property rural? Does that matter? Is it what is the condition of the home? Is it financeable? Do we need to help somebody pivot to a hard money loan if the property is not really eligible for a traditional residential mortgage loan? These are all things. Are you available on the weekends? Because that's when investors do things. Oftentimes the difference for our clients is, if we get an investor-friendly lender gets a call from a listing agent on Sunday, they're going to answer it on behalf of their client. And frankly, folks that are typically used to working with primary residences may or may not be available on the weekend, and that's a handful of some of the differences.
Yeah.
Dan, you have any others to add?
Yeah, I mean, Scott kind of touched on this. From an investor-friendly standpoint, investor-friendly lender standpoint, we've had investors come to us and they've gone to other lenders and they're offered like one thing, like they can do X for us. We have like 30 things that we can do. So I mean, there's just so many, and our the company that we work with right now currently, they are in a product development phase of creating and distributing to the retail channel, which is us that works with the consumer, more and more investor products. In fact, that's probably the number one product we're getting is investment property, short-term rental, second home product. We're not getting new primary residence products because there's really nothing new to do there. There's a lot of new stuff to be had in that investor-friendly space. And so the market has definitely been driven the last few years to creating that product, and our company's actually been doing that as well. And so what that's done is it's enabled us to be even sharper in price, which obviously is the interest rate and fee structure, give them more options, whether it's being able to do a DSCR loan or if they're self-employed, doing like a bank statement loan. A lot of physicians, once they build their portfolio, depending on how they're doing things within their business, if they're self-employed, they may not be, even though they may make really good income, they may not be the easiest person to get just a regular loan for. They might need to find a different type of product out there. And so we spend a lot of time working with people to try to find them the best thing and the best solution for their scenario. That's usually one of the things that definitely sets us apart is we can give them more options when others cannot.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to and share our experience, right? Our insight about working with investor-friendly lenders and working with you guys. One of the most important things that I think that most people miss is that you guys will help us win more deals. And some people go out there and shop for interest rates, but we work with you because we want to make sure that we can close a transaction. And just a few examples. One is, we had a property with two buildings on a single parcel. And I know that if we went to a regular residential lender who's used to working with a single family home with no other structures on the same property, that might be very difficult for them to finance. But somehow you guys are able to figure out how to get that through and get us a great loan on that. I think a couple other things that you've helped us do is speak to the listing broker when we were trying to buy a property that we use as a short-term rental. And because of the conversation they had with you, you guys gave them confidence that we would follow through and that you guys would also close the loan as well, right? So that was another reason why we were able to win a deal. And so those are just a couple of examples of us winning deals that we might not have won. And again, all because we were working with somebody who understood our needs and what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think also I have to talk about thought partnership, because I think when you work with an investor-friendly lender, because they're so experienced in all these different products, certainly, but they're experienced because they've seen so many deals, what worked, what didn't work, that you guys are able to be a thought partner for us to help us make sure we can get a lot of loans. I remember at some point, Kenji and I, between the two of us, had well over 10 residential loans. And part of that was because you guys were helping us really look good on paper and be able to get more loans and get multiple loans at the same time, which I think we get that question all the time, is like, could I put in multiple offers on investment properties? Could I be under contract for multiple properties? And we're like, yes, absolutely. But you've really got to work with somebody who understands what they're doing, who can make you look great as a person to loan to for the bank. So the next one we really wanted to highlight was that that you generally pay a higher interest rate for investment properties. So can you guys talk about the details of that and how that works out and how people can put that into their numbers when they're calculating their cash and cash return?
The rates that you'll see advertised, or the prevailing mortgage rate, is always going to be, you should assume, very high credit score, owner-occupied primary residence with at least 20% down. And second homes do carry a premium. When I say a premium, I mean a little bit of a higher interest rate or fee structure. And investment transactions carry a little bit of a higher rate and fee structure as well. In addition, there are differences in rates between whether it's a single-family investment property or a multifamily investment property. If you're buying a second home with 10% down, that's going to carry a different structure than 15% down or 20% down. The size of the loan can impact the rate that you pay. And so, what we can, as a rule of thumb, we can say, all right, if the going rate right now is 6.25 on a primary residence, then assume something to 7.25 to 7 3/8 for an investment. Those are very broad strokes. And really, if anyone is or is evaluating a transaction, that should just get you closer. And what we always advise our clients is, hey, once you find something you're really interested in, send it over to me. Because there's, like I said, there's so many different variables that go into interest rates. And as you are evaluating a transaction to see if it's going to work from an investment perspective, the resulting numbers that you get on a cash-on-cash calculator are only going to be as good as the inputs. So having those numbers dialed in ahead of time when you're evaluating those potential projects is of paramount importance.
Now let's dive into the next insight about lending for investment properties. And there's this misconception that you can't transfer a property into an LLC without triggering the due on sale clause, which basically means that when you transfer a property into your own LLC, then the lender can call the loan due and say, okay, you need to pay the entire balance. Can you talk to us a little bit about that misconception?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on the on this topic, it gets brought up a lot. It's a huge concern. For the most part, the loans that we do and the investors we work with. So it's very important to understand that distinction is that for what we do, we have zero issues in that space. There are some specific lenders that we work with, or investors, that they can say, we don't want this to happen. Like, they don't want it to move into an LLC or in and out of it. So when we're working with our client, we just make sure we know what they want to do. So we place them in a product that doesn't care. For the most part, you can do that. Now, I will say across the country, They do need to be careful on the vesting in an LLC and moving it in and out, because not every county and or state is going to have the same laws and or rules. And I know that there are some spaces in the country where there are some pretty exorbitant fees to move the property in and out of an LLC. So that's where it might be advantageous to actually close in the LLC at the time that you do the purchase. And again, we have investors that do that. Not every investor does that, but we do have multiple investors that allow vesting in the LLC. So then that then just, of course, takes away that, moving it from the individual name into the LLC post-closing. They just don't have to do that. So again, it's all just part of the process when we're working with them on the front end, where they're buying, what is the use of the property, what is their plan with the property, do they move it in and out of an LLC, do they want to do that? We have some investors where even though they could move it in and out of an LLC, they have gotten to a space where they want to just close all their properties in an LLC, and so we just do that going forward. So, but yeah, everyone that we work with, we go over that with them. We make sure whatever product they're in, they're not going to have any of that due on sale clause issue. And again, that being said, there are investors out there or lenders out there where they could trigger that due on sale clause. So they do need to be careful that they're making sure they're working with the lender and bringing it up, talking about it, reviewing it, going through and making sure that we understand what they want to do after the property is in their name, so that they can do it safely and effectively.
Yeah, one of the things I want to note is you guys have helped us so many times actually move a property out of the LLC, refinance, and move it back into the LLC. And so that's really a normal thing that you start to see when you're working with an investor-friendly lender, is they're just used to this stuff and will even kind of help facilitate pieces of it, because that's part of what they see happening all the time, and it's normal, and you don't have to feel like you have to hide it. So many people feel like they're hiding the fact that they're putting a property into an LLC after.
We don't want you to hide anything. So we need to know everything, and then that way we can help obviously set up the way that they want it structured, so that they can do all the stuff that they're doing. Believe it or not, embedded in most loan guidelines, like if it's a refinance, are actual guidelines on what you need to do with the property if it's in an LLC, how to get it out of it, put it in their individual name so that you can close the refinance, and then obviously when they're done, they can move it back. So it doesn't need to be a secret for sure.
And I wanted to emphasize, that you guys, over the years, having worked with thousands of investors, have become very well versed in this. And so I'm just thinking about our residential lender who lends to people buying their primary homes. They may not know this kind of nitty gritty, right? And so again, just wanted to emphasize how important it is, that experience you mentioned, right? Because you have so much experience, because you've read through all those loan documents, what can and can't be done. And also the guidance, right, is also really important. I wanted to emphasize that, because what you're doing is you're sitting down with investors, understanding what they're wanting to do with transferring their properties into an LLC for asset protection, and what the implications are going to be for lending in the loan. And so again, I just wanted to emphasize how important it is that you have somebody who is guiding you and helping you meet your goals.
Yeah, I want also people to hear that different states have different rules. And it's so often that people are surprised by transfer taxes into LLCs and finding that out in the state. So, if you can, when you figure that out ahead of time, because all this stuff is figure outable ahead of time, then you may be able to choose a different loan product, knowing that that's going to allow you to avoid those transfer taxes, because you're going to close in that LLC's name rather than your personal name. Now you're going to have that additional anonymity as well, and you have that balance of understanding before you go to close. Am I willing maybe to pay a slightly higher interest rate, but I don't have to pay the transfer taxes? Like, that's the math you need to do ahead of time. And if you understand what you're buying, where you're buying it, and the ramifications of that, you can plan ahead. And all of us want to anticipate, right? Anticipate problems instead of reacting to them once they've already happened. And that's really the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, Leti, all local governments and state governments are experiencing shortfalls. So they're all looking for additional sources of revenue. And it really used to be that the state of Pennsylvania was one in particular that famously charges an excise tax, and depending on what city you're in, it can be exorbitant, up to 4%, the transfer title to your LLC. They're not the only ones. Maryland has enacted excise tax on transfers. Florida pay almost a point to do it there. So, this is probably going to be something that we're seeing more of, not less of. So it's definitely important. And back to the question about the transferring of the LLC, if you had 50 lenders and you asked them all, does this trigger the due on sale clause? You could literally get 50 different answers. And just back to Leiti's original point about working with an investor-friendly lender, and Dan's point about knowing which programs allow it, knowing which programs don't, very, very important, because you don't want to end up in a bad situation that could have been avoided.
Absolutely. Now, one other thing I wanted everybody to hear about is all the different loan options available for investment properties. Now, we alluded to this in the very beginning, right? We were talking about how, the company that you work with is coming up with so many different options for investors. Can you talk about some of those different options? Maybe we can say, hey, I'm going to buy a long-term rental and I'm going to buy a short-term rental. Like, what are some of those different options available to me today that I just need to be aware of?
Interestingly enough, still the most popular loan that we do is either a Fannie Mae Freddie Mac or one of our Fannie Mae Freddie Mac equivalents, which basically means you can do as little as 15% down on a single family investment property, or 20 to 25% down on multifamily, 10% down on a second home. And ultimately, if you do that, you are typically going to get the most favorable terms. And that is because your own personal income and liabilities and assets are being evaluated along with your credit. But oftentimes, especially when you work with physician investors, you have situations where somebody was W-2 and they've now transferred to 1099, or they've gone, even if they remain W-2, they've gone locums and now their income is variable, and it becomes more challenging to be able to do that. So as Dan mentioned earlier, that's where we have our expanded suite of programs available, where we can do 1 year 1099 for a client, asset depletion. If they have a large amount of liquid and retirement assets, we can actually provide a run rate to give them income credit for that. Probably the most popular that it was mentioned earlier is DSCR, or debt service coverage ratio, which essentially means we want to keep the total payment on the property not to exceed the amount of rental income that we can expect. And obviously, if you're dealing with a multifamily property, that's just more opportunities for rent. But that's one that is very, very popular. One of the newer ones that we have, though, is as short-term rentals have become more popular, the industry as a whole just had a hard time wrapping its brain around how to do a DSCR loan coupled with a short-term rental. Because unlike a long-term rental where there's a lease and something concrete, short-term rental, are we taking a look at AirDNA data? Are we taking a look if it's been in service at VRBO or Airbnb data? Does the seller have books? All of these things matter. And what we've seen is some really nice expansions in this space where we can literally now, if AirDNA gives us a 40% occupancy and we can use 80% of the projected income up with 20% down with relatively favorable rates. And so it's the nice thing about that is instead of having to wait for the appraisal report, we can actually essentially underwrite the income right up front and be able to have more certainty. And so that's probably the latest and greatest of our investor-friendly products. But as Dan mentioned, we have, just as an industry, we have more products coming, probably not less, going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing because, and this is a real misconception, and this is why we're doing this podcast, because we want to make sure that people have these insights. But one of the things that most people miss is that they assume that if they don't have a W-2, right? And a lot of people are in transition. A lot of people switch to 1099, and they assume if they don't have a W-2, they're not going to qualify for a loan. But now, you guys are talking about all these different options, not income-based, but they don't have to have a job necessarily, but they could basically get a loan based on the income that the property generates. So many different options out there, and I think a big misconception that keep people on the sidelines because they just assume, well, I can't qualify for a loan anyway.
Mm-hmm. Or I need a big down payment for a loan, which we all just talked about, which is all the different options available for down payments. One thing I wanted to make sure we highlighted as a misconception is that there are actually even more options for people who want to go and live in a property as a primary home and actually have, let's say, buy a duplex or buy a fourplex and house hack, where they live in one unit, they get a primary home loan, and then they have that option of putting renters in the other units. And we especially have people who do that or residency and fellowship or new attendings. And Kenji and I have personally done that as well, where we lived in a home and we got a primary home loan with you guys, and had a smaller down payment, but also had a renter downstairs. So can you guys talk about that option and how you see people do that as newer physicians, and what are the different options for them?
Yeah, I mean, up until about a few years ago, trying to remember when, it used to be that if you bought, the best house hack was buying a single family residence with an ADU. That was kind of the best way to go, low money down, but get multiple units. Well, a few years ago, multifamily 2 to 4 units, so a duplex, triplex, fourplex, it used to be you had to even owner occupied. Most of the product out there was 20% down, and that reverted to 5% down. So a couple years ago, if it's owner occupied, you can now buy a 2, 3, or 4 unit property with as little as 5% down. And so from a house hacking standpoint, that's, if they don't own any other property and or they're moving or relocating to another, metro area or something, that is the quickest way to get multiple units for very little money down if they can stand that style of living, right? So living in a multifamily property is going to be a little bit more of an apartment style if it's a fourplex, but it's definitely a way to get at 4 units for, very little money down when they buy the property. The note and deed of trust just state that their intent is to live in that property for the next 12 months. And so after that, they can move out of it, go buy another property, whatnot, and convert it to a full-blown rental, and they only put 5% down. So there's that piece of it. Then again, there's the buying it. A lot of times we see, especially in a lot of metro areas, we're seeing a lot of density changes, where especially in the cities, they're allowing, condominiumized ADUs and or properties that you can subdivide really easy and build additional units on. So there's that house hacking. There's the one I brought up earlier, which a lot of traditionally more rural properties will have multiple residences on them, because they had like an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, that could have been for whatever reason, and those are essentially 2 unit properties, right? So you can rent one of them out, and they know it's going to be rented out, and then live in the other one. So there's lots of different things out there to do that, and that's primarily the best house hack is to find a way to get multiple units out of a property that might only be 1 unit, and or go try to find a fourplex that you can buy and utilize the 5% down option that's out there and available.
Amazing. I love that option for people who are just starting out, right? And they have so many concerns, like how much money do I have to have saved up to be able to buy an investment property? And, if it's 5%, that's a lot lower lift for people. And then we mentioned 10% down with short-term rental, second home loan, 15% maybe for a single family and long-term rental. So there's so many different options. And, in our community, ideally, people are forcing appreciation. They're increasing the value of the property after they buy it. And all of a sudden, they actually have a lot more equity. And that allows them then to take that equity and roll it into their next property with a cash out refinance, or maybe even 1031 exchanging and going bigger, and grow their portfolio by reusing the same money over and over again.
And not even necessarily just for new physicians either. Just timely, we closed a transaction last month for an very experienced physician who was downsizing and just wanted to supercharge the investing, and bought a fourplex, going to live in it for a year, and is then going to rent that unit out and do it all over again.
I love it. That's amazing. That's so cool.
It.
Well, Dan and Scott, thank you so much for your time. Can you tell everyone how they can get a hold of you and how they can kind of set up to start their investment property journey with lending?
Yeah, no, we can be reached. Our website's probably the best way. It's www.danpeckteam.com, so very easily. Our phone numbers are going to be on there. My cell phone number is 206-660-6241. And then, Scott, what's your contact info?
253-334-4854.
I love that you guys are just giving out your cell phone numbers. And it's important to know that everyone needs to make sure that they let you guys know that they're from the semi-retired MD community, because you have a deal where they get off money from closing costs. Can you talk about that?
Anybody that gets referred to us when in any way, shape, or form through Kenji and Leite, whether it's taking one of the courses or listening to the podcast, gets a lender credit on any and all transactions they do with us. And those are variable depending on loan amount, but that is in place and always will be.
And remember to get your primary homes right through you guys too, because that also works for your primary homes. We see so many people go and get investment properties and then say, hey, I want to refi my primary home, or I'm going to be moving across the country, I'm going to buy a new primary home, and you guys are able to help them. So thank you for all that you both do for our community, both in education, and I just know how much you care and how much you help them and how much you come in and save people a lot of times when their loans are falling apart with other lenders. So we're so appreciative of being partners with you guys for, I don't know, what, 9 years now or so?
9 years,
And 10 years, actually.
10 years.
10
It's been a
years.
decade. It's been a
Yeah.
decade. We so appreciate you guys too. Love everybody in the community that comes our way. And you know, the reason we give our cell phone numbers out is we're accessible, guys. We're not hard to get a hold of. You know, half the time I just pick up the phone right away if I'm not on it. So it's very easy to get a hold of Scott or I and get questions answered. And we're here to help and look forward to you guys all reaching out.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.